All right, welcome everybody. We are going to get started here in just a minute. Obviously, want to give people a chance to get in and connected with audio and everything else. Usually takes about a minute once people start flowing in. Glad that you're here. Hopefully, this will be a helpful lunch and e-learn topic for you all. Also, just kind of a couple of ground floor housekeeping types of things. You in the webinar format, you ought to be able to raise your hand if you have a question. There's also a questions panel. Feel free to put a question in the panel anytime you have a question, and we will try to answer those during the lunch and learn. And if we don't get a chance to, we'll obviously follow up after the lunch and learn session today. Chat panel should work as well, where you can chat with us, ask a question. We are recording this session, and so at the conclusion of today's lunch and learn, we will send out a link to the recording. There's a resource that we'll be talking about during today's lunch and learn, and if you want a copy of that, I've got a slide where you can tell us if you would like that. So anyways, lots of good resources for you today. Let's go ahead and jump right into the content because I know this is lunchtime. Everybody's got just a brief amount of time. So first off, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you're connecting from throughout the world. My name is Brad White. I'm the CEO of VARC Solutions. And today we're going to be talking about how to ensure that your books are CPA ready. Okay. To go through the agenda, it's a very short agenda. Our goal with these lunch and learns is to take 15, 20 minutes, give you real quick actionable things to do, and then enjoy the rest of your lunch and then kind of go on with the rest of your day. That's the goal. Today, we're going to be covering just an overview of the 48-point checklist that we use at VARC Solutions when we help clients with end-of-the-year file reviews, making sure that we're helping clients get their file and their books ready for their CPA. And so kind of give you an overview of that, but then also we're going to go dive through some very specifics and give you some things that you should check right now. Okay. If you're the owner, if you're your own bookkeeper, internal accountant, these are some things that you should be checking right now before you hand off your books to your own accountant, who might come back later and say, hey, there's some things that you need to clean up before I can really do my job. Okay, so that is the goal. I'm going to give you those two big agendas. First off is the overview of the 48-point file review checklist. And by the way, the culmination of this is we went to our team and said, hey, what are the things that we need to be checking? Not just, I mean, at the end of the year for sure, but on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, what are those things that we should be looking at to make sure that we're doing our job for our clients, but also for those clients that are more do-it-yourselfers, what are the things that they should be looking at? And we came up with a 48-point checklist. And so this is just, again, a high-level overview. In our checklist, we cover really 4 categories of things. First is just making sure that you've got everything you need in your books to have accurate reports so that you can make better business decisions. Identify errors and omissions. So sometimes the mistakes that we make are not just things that we did wrong. It might be that we just forgot to do something. Okay. And of course, if we made some data entry mistakes, we want to be able to catch those as well. Routine maintenance, improving the performance of your file, whether you're on QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online. There's things that you can do from an efficiency standpoint, making sure the file's running at top speed, and then doing the things that you need to do to avoid costly penalties, interest, IRS fees, things like that. So just a couple things to check to make sure that you're doing what you're needing to be doing. Or again, if you're monitoring somebody else within your company, making sure that they're doing some of those things. This checklist, by the way, we're happy to send this to you if you ask for it. But basically, we include things like looking out for specific red flags in your account balances, identifying if sales taxes are getting paid correctly and filed properly. Are your vendors set up properly to be able to produce 1099s at the end of the year? We look for things like open AR, open AP, uncleared checks, our accounts getting reconciled, all sorts of stuff. But basically, this is our 48-point checklist that really kind of gives you, again, the highlights of the types of things that we look for. And again, if you want to copy that, happy to send that over to you. Okay. So in terms of what you could be checking now, okay, so take that checklist, and I've taken about 8 to 10 of those things off of that checklist. So I want to kind of do a dive into those specifically. And I'm going to show these on screen either within QBO or desktop, because I know we have people that use one or the other. And the first thing is to look at your chart of accounts and look for maybe any redundant accounts on your chart of accounts. Those may be things where somebody accidentally created an account that really already existed, just in a slightly different name or wording. And so those are things that you want to look at and potentially clean up. So I'm going to give you an example of that. Pull up my screen here and see if I can pull up that on the screen. Give me one moment here. All right, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to move things on and off the screen just depending on what I'm trying to show you at any given moment. But to give you an example, in QuickBooks Online, you can go to your accounting tab and go to your chart of accounts. Okay. And within the chart of accounts, you can scroll up and scroll down, and you could look at all the different income accounts, the expense accounts that you have, things like that. And what I'm talking about when I say redundant chart of accounts, things like this. Let's say you go down and you look at your office expenses, and you've got things like office expenses, you've got office supplies, you've got office supplies with a slightly different spelling. That happens. It happens when we create an account on the fly. We're not going back and looking to see what's already there. This happens just throughout the year. Sometimes you'll have some of those redundant accounts get set up. And then when you look at your profit and loss, you're going to see those different accounts. Well, how do you fix that by merging those accounts if they're in fact the same thing, okay? But the key is to make sure you're looking for those things first to see if those are there. The other thing that I would suggest is just looking for your chart of accounts. Is it providing enough detail for you? Is it providing enough clarity for you to make business decisions? And I'm going to tell you just a really brief personal example story of this. But if you look at your income accounts, whether you're a property management company or a lawyer or a plumbing company, you're going to have different accounts. And so you're not going to have the same thing that I might have. And this is a landscaping sample file. But my point is, when you look at your accounts or your profit and loss and you see income, is that giving you enough detail to make decisions, to really understand your business? And so like in our business, we had a category called bookkeeping, okay? But I wanted to know, well, how much of that was like recurring bookkeeping services versus one-off sort of hourly bookkeeping services? And so to do that, I created a separate account, one called Bookkeeping Fixed Monthly, another one called Bookkeeping Hourly. And that allowed me to get greater clarity on how, what was really moving the needle in my business. So that would be something, obviously you don't need to have that for your CPA, but for your internal purposes and decision-making, that's just something I would look at to see, hey, are your accounts set up the way you want them to be? Okay. The second thing that I would talk about here is trends. Looking at your P&L for trends. You're looking for gaps in expenses or gaps in income and maybe doubled up months. And I'll give you an example using QuickBooks Desktop for this. I'm going to, again, pull that on the screen here where we can see it. Just give me a second here. And I'm going to try to get this to where it's not too small for everybody. But let me move this over on the screen here. And so just to give you an example, in QuickBooks Desktop, I basically went in and ran a profit and loss statement, and then I totaled it by month. Okay. And I pre-built one example here just because I wanted to dramatize it for you. But notice we've got insurance expense here, and it's clocking along every month, just like normal, just like clockwork. But then one month I've got it doubled, and then in the next month I've got zero. Okay. That would be an example of something to look for in terms of trends. Because what that indicates is when I did the data entry on that insurance expense, I put two in the same month when I really should have put the second one in the next month. Okay. That would be an example where you're looking for either gaps in numbers that you would expect a number, and potentially much larger numbers in one month when they should have been more even. And what we're really trying to find there is, again, the mistakes. I made a mistake. I should have put that in the right month. I didn't. Okay. The other thing you can look for just in terms of trends is, looking at your income. Is it going up every single month? Is it going down? Are your accounts receivable on your balance sheet going up? Are they going down? So looking at your P&L, not just sending them to your accountant, but looking at your P&L, looking at your balance sheet and just seeing, are there trends that you can discern from those numbers? Things are getting better, things are getting worse, just to be aware of that type of thing. Okay, so that's the topic on trends that we would be looking at. Another thing you'd want to look at is bank reconciliations. So bank reconciliations is where you find, quite frankly, a lot of the mistakes. If when we take on brand new clients and they haven't reconciled their books for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, whatever, we know that there are mistakes, and we know that there are things that maybe even haven't been entered. And the way you catch that is by doing your bank reconciliations, doing your credit card reconciliations. So one of the things that we look at for our clients is, when was the last time that they reconciled their accounts? And again, just as an example, if I go into QBO and I go into my accounting hub and I go to the reconcile section, one of the things that I can look at is called a history by account. Okay. And on that history by account, I can then see when was the last time that account was reconciled. And if it's never been reconciled, again, that's one of the red flags. I would go, okay, well, that's step one. We need to get this account reconciled. But you can see when it was last reconciled, what was the statement ending date, and am I seeing that being reconciled every single month? You don't want to just reconcile your checking account. You want to reconcile your savings account, your loan accounts. I'd say, generally speaking, one of the things that we find with a lot of clients in a lot of businesses is they may be reconciling their checking account, but they may not be reconciling things like their loan accounts. They've got a truck loan that they're paying every month. But when you get that truck loan statement, you need to be reconciling it just like you reconcile your checking account. Okay. So it's important to be aware of that and mindful of that, because if you didn't know this, when you get that truck loan statement, it's going to show you, hey, yeah, you paid $1,000 last month. Here's the amount that was principal. Here's the amount that was interest. And you need to make sure that you're recording the P&I split on those payments so that your truck value and the loan balance are accurate. And if you're not reconciling it, it's very likely that those balances are not accurate. Okay. One more, class tracking. So class tracking is something you don't have to use, but a lot of companies do. So for example, if you had different departments in your organization, you had different locations, different cities, what have you. You might have set up class tracking in QBO. You might have set this up in QuickBooks Desktop. And if you have, it's important to make sure that you're tracking those classes on every transaction. I'll give you an example. In this QuickBooks Desktop file, we've got basically a pool manufacturer, pool installer, and there's different classes that have been set up. So what I did is I ran not just a standard profit and loss, but I did a profit and loss by class. And when you do that, you're going to see the P&L by class, which is great. Okay. But if you see unclassified stuff in there, it's probable that you have not classified something that should have been classified. And by the way, just to be real here for a second, it's almost impossible to completely eliminate stuff that's in the unclassified column. There are certain things that you might be very, very difficult to classify. But if you see it, one of the steps that you should do is go back and try to fill in the classes as much as possible so that those dollars are being categorized properly in the right class. The expenses are getting properly categorized. And that could just be as simple as zooming in or double clicking and then going into those transactions that were not classified and putting in a class. Just going back, putting in the data, making sure that stuff is getting filled in so that P&L by class is, again, accurate. So what you're looking for, if you use class tracking, is nothing in the unclassified portion. And by the way, some people would say, well, what about overhead? What about the stuff that really isn't for a specific class? Well, what I would do is I would set up a class called overhead, or set up another class called admin, or just company-wide, and then make sure that stuff that is overhead is classified in the overhead class. And that way, anything that does show up in unclassified is literally something that was you forgot to classify. Okay, that way that it's less of that's where it should be versus a mistake. And again, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to catch the mistakes so that our financials are accurate. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So we talked about accurate reports. I'm going to also just briefly talk about errors and omissions. And so, for example, AR aging reports. We're looking for something that didn't happen that should have happened, okay? And for example, if I go into an AR aging report, so if I go to whether it's QuickBooks Online or desktop, and I go to my standard reports and I look for the AR aging reports, that's supposed to show me who owes me money, and is that money current, 1 to 30 days past due, etc. And one of the things that you could look at here, first off, I mean, just as a general business practice, you probably ought to be calling those folks that are over 90 days saying, hey, when are you going to send me your money? 61 to 90 days, I'd be calling those people as well. But what you're looking for is also stuff that's just not right. For example, why on an AR aging report would you have a customer that has a $0 balance? And if you see that, it's very likely something hasn't been done. So for example, notice that they have an outstanding invoice for $75, but there's also an outstanding credit that has not been applied to that outstanding invoice. Well, it's going to continue showing up. You might even send collection letters to that client saying you haven't paid. You need to send us $75, which is not going to look very good when they tell you that you haven't applied the payment or the credit that you promised them 3 months ago. So if you see something like negative amounts on an AR aging report, that would be a sign that something is not right. Okay. Well, let's take another example. Let's say you went into your QuickBooks online reports and you ran an inventory evaluation summary report. Okay. Obviously, if you're not using inventory, don't worry about it. But if you are managing inventory in QuickBooks Desktop or online, what you would hope to not see is negative inventory. So for example, if I go run that inventory evaluation report and I see negative quantity on hand, there's something wrong. Either I didn't record a purchase that needed to get recorded. Like maybe I literally received a bill from a vendor that I bought some stuff for, but instead of recording it as an inventory purchase, I recorded it as an expense. Okay. So I didn't add to my inventory balances. Maybe inventory got walked out the door, so to speak. Somebody stole the inventory. Maybe I just didn't record a purchase or a sale correctly. So anytime I see a negative on an inventory report in the quantity column, that would be a sign that something needs to be investigated. Something may not be right. Okay. All right. I'm going to show you one more related to this category of errors and omissions. And so let's take the scenario where we have checks that have been sent out. You've printed a check, you've mailed a check, and it just hasn't cleared. You would expect to see that within 30 to 60 days. But if you go in and you run a report, and I'm going to just run this in QuickBooks Desktop for now. Let's say I went out and run a check detail report, and I'm going to run this for all dates. Okay. So it's going to show me all checks. And then I'm going to customize this report and apply a filter for the cleared status equals no. Okay. So all the checks that have not cleared the bank. Okay. Now, again, if I looked at this and I see a lot of transactions within the last 30 days, no big deal. But if I see some transactions that are maybe a year old, 6 months old, something like that, it's very likely that one, that check is lost in the mail. Maybe it needs to be voided. Maybe you need to call up the recipient and say, hey, did you get the check? And a lot of times it's going to be they moved, they didn't get the check, it got returned, whatever. But that's just something that you can check, because at the end of the year, especially at the end of the year, when you're getting your files ready for your CPA, you don't want to have a whole bunch of old uncleared checks from 6 months ago, 18 months ago, whatever. Those are transactions that probably are never going to clear the bank and probably need to be voided, but there's a process to void those checks correctly so they don't mess up last year's financials, so they don't mess up last year's tax returns, things like that. But again, the reason why I bring it up here is if you've got old uncleared checks, those are things that you want to resolve before your accountant does your current year's taxes. And those are small adjustments, maybe even big adjustments that might need to be made there. Okay. Again, if you have questions, by the way, as we go, feel free and put them in the questions panel. Otherwise, I just kind of keep going. So, feel free to ask those questions or put anything in chat that you have questions about. Okay. On the category of routine maintenance, what I want to make sure that you're doing, if you're on the desktop side of things, is you're looking and checking for updates. QuickBooks Desktop usually comes out with maintenance release updates every 2-3 months. A lot of times those are just bug fixes, small feature adjustments, things like that. I also want to make sure that you're doing your backups. Make sure that you're doing your backups on time. I'm going to come back and talk about QBO and a couple things there. But on the desktop side, if you guys are using desktop, what you can do is you can actually, while you're on the screen, you can press Control plus the number 1 on your keyboard, Control 1, and it'll bring up what is called the product information window. And this is where you can go in and see what release you're on. Okay. You probably are still getting those prompts every once in a while that says, hey, there's a new release, do you want to download and update and install? But if you're not sure, you can press that Control key plus the 1 key, and you can see what version and what release you're on right there. What about backups? So again, if you're on desktop, I think it's even more important than online to make sure that you're doing your backups. Even if you're on a network and the network is getting backed up, I still recommend that you make your own local copies of your backups, store them off site, do those types of things. But if you go to your file menu and go to backup company, it will tell you right here at the very top. You can kind of see it in gray. It says last backup, and it'll give you the date and the time. If you don't see a last backup, you probably need to do it. And so just go create a local backup, save it on a local machine, save it on a USB drive, save it and get it off that computer just in case. But that would be something that I would recommend that you check out in QuickBooks Desktop. In QuickBooks Online, there's a couple things that I would recommend. And again, let me pull up this on the screen here. Okay, so in QuickBooks Online, by the way, if you're on QuickBooks Online, Simple Start, Essentials, or Plus, yes, the QuickBooks Intuit, so to speak, is backing up your basic file there. but there's no like backup restore functionality built into the software. Okay. If you have QuickBooks Online Advanced, you actually can go in and look at your backup. So for example, you can go to the gear icon and you can go to the backup company and you can tell it to make a backup. You can also restore as of a specific date if you're using that feature within QuickBooks Online Advanced. If you're not on QuickBooks Online Advanced, I think it's still important that you back up your file. And we recommend a feature, an add-on software, if you will, called Rewind. And so I put a link here on the screen. It's Rewind Backups. And if you will take a note of that URL, that is a link to our affiliate code for Rewind Backups. It'll save you a little bit of money on that Rewind Backup service. But what's cool about the Rewind Backups is it's not just as of a particular date. It actually gives you transaction level restore capabilities. So like if let's say yesterday there was a backup done, but you messed up a transaction today, you could restore literally the one transaction as opposed to restoring everything back to a prior day. So it's definitely a better service, better solution. So that's bit.ly/rewind backups. That's our little shortcut code for that. The other thing that I would recommend in QuickBooks Online is to make sure that your bank feeds are still connected. By the way, this is not an unusual thing to have your bank accounts and credit cards disconnect from your banks. A lot of times the banks, whether it's Chase, Wells Fargo, what have you, a lot of times they will make changes or they will time out your authorized connection with their account. And so it's not uncommon, even when we're doing books for our clients, to come into their bank section, go into the accounting and go to the bank transactions and find that there's an account that's disconnected. You'll typically have that little exclamation point letting you know. And so you can go in and update. You can also go into manage connections and basically re-authenticate that account with your bank so that transactions are flowing, so that all those transactions are getting brought in for you to then categorize, etc. Okay. So go to your bank area and make sure that your bank feeds are still connected and those accounts are flowing in. Okay. The last thing I want to really talk about in terms of the content is just how do you avoid penalties and interest and things like that, whether it's your state, whether it's the IRS. The two big ones are things like sales tax and payroll taxes. So generally speaking, you just want to make sure that your sales taxes are getting paid correctly and on time. You want to make sure that your payroll taxes are getting paid correctly and on time. And one of the things that I would just suggest is when you go look at your chart of accounts, and I'm just going to use QuickBooks Desktop on here, for example. If you go to your sales tax payable, in a normal scenario, right, it would show that you owe money. But let's say that you just paid all your sales taxes and your sales tax payable balance didn't go down, okay? It could be that you recorded your sales tax payment incorrectly. Also, in QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop, there's a built-in feature for paying sales tax, and there's a built-in feature for paying payroll liabilities. And it's different than just writing a normal check. Okay, it's different from just entering a bill and paying a bill. Okay, so if you are using if you're using QuickBooks for sales taxes and payroll, you're going to want to make sure that when you pay your sales tax, you're using the built-in pay sales tax feature. Okay, if you're going to be doing payroll, you want to use your built-in pay liability feature, because if you don't, you may be offsetting the sales tax payable balances or payroll liability balances on your chart of accounts and your balance sheet, but you may not be affecting your sales tax reporting the way it needs to be recorded. So like if you go to your sales tax liability report and it shows that you owe a whole bunch of money, but you know you've already paid it, it may be that you paid your sales taxes incorrectly. Okay. So those are just a few things that you want to check for, especially at the end of the year. But I would also just encourage you to check those things out, maybe on a quarterly basis. If you've got a checklist of things that you just want to review off that massive checklist, things that you might want to check on a monthly basis, like making sure that things are reconciled, those would be best practices for you. All right. So again, I didn't show you every single thing on the checklist, but I wanted to give you some really specific ones that you could go check right now. If you have any questions, happy to address those. Feel free to unmute yourself. Feel free to raise your hand. Also, if you want a copy of the file review checklist that we use, send an email to team@varcsolutions.com and just say, hey, I'd like a copy of the full file review checklist. Okay. If you want us to do that file review for you, you can also ask them that at the same time. We do have a special, by the way, going on until the end of January. So we have a $300 off year-end file review. You just have to order the file review before the end of January, and we have an offer code there for year-end 25. So feel free to, again, take a look at it yourself. If you want us to do it for you and do the full checklist, let us know. And I'm going to leave this last screen on here while we talk about any questions that are outstanding. But basically, if you ever need any help with QuickBooks, let us know. Phone number's there, email is there, the website's there. Also, the next Lunch and Learn is going to be next Tuesday at noon Central Standard Time. And next week, we're going to be talking about avoiding penalties related to late or incorrectly filed 1099s and W-2s. So this is very timely for right now. You all should be looking at getting ready to send out your 1099s and W-2s. And so next week, we'll talk about some of the mistakes that are made there, some of the errors that you can encounter. And we'll also talk about how we can help if you want some help with that. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the chat panel and just want to see if there's any questions in there that I can address. Okay, so one of the questions from James, you said basically going back to the class tracking, would it be used for both revenue classifications as well as cost side or expense side? And the answer is yes. In fact, just as a general rule, and let me pull that up on the screen real quickly. When you think of class tracking, again, whether it's QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online, class tracking is intended to be that overall umbrella categorization for your entire chart of accounts. So that includes your income accounts. It also includes your COGS. It includes your expenses. And so that's why we think of it more of like departments, where you're going to have income and expenses by department, location, cost center, different lines of work like commercial versus residential. And so I want to see all my income and all my expenses broken down by those classes. And that way I have a full picture by department potentially, of how that department is doing on a P&L basis. So yeah, great question, James. Let me see if there's any other questions here in the questions panel. All right, and I don't see any that we haven't answered. So again, I hope this was useful for you. We will send out the recording after we get everything processed on our end. Thanks for showing up to today's Lunch and Learn, and hopefully we'll see you next week as well. Talk to you soon.